We go.
Okay, and we're going to be on Facebook Live too, Tony.
Yeah, I'm getting over there to share it now. So.
All right. Well, sorry to talk internal stuff before I say welcome to Professor Tootle. How are you doing, Stephen?
I'm great.
All right. You said it's cold in California. What's the deal with that?
I don't know. It's I'm being cold for California.
Okay, yeah, because there's snowfields behind me. I don't know if
right.
Yeah.
But the idea that we would have daytime highs in the 40s is pretty cool for here.
That does sound chilly.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, appreciate your continued volunteerism and our effort towards understanding our government and our history of the U.S. and citizen role and responsibilities. We're into like 53 or 55 shows now. That actually almost looks like we care.
Yeah. Well, it certainly seems like we're either that or we are incredibly stubborn.
Or we don't have a better hobby or something. But as you've mentioned to me, you do have some friends and strangers alike that somehow figure out how to find this on the interweb. And so do I. And hopefully at some point, I don't care if it ever goes viral or if you ever become famous, but I do think as a resource, we're doing one small portion to try to help people understand governance in our society. So thank you.
As my old professor used to say, all you can do is run it up the flagpole and see who salutes.
Yeah, well, that's like an army thing. Yeah, and the answer is we salute everything because we're going to get yelled at or punished if we don't. Yeah, because of patriotism. Sorry. Okay. All right, Professor. Who has power in America? So that's the philosophical kind of question, but I mean it more specific in this way. I think you kind of wrote a nuance of this in your dissertation. Who had influence in society and how people got elected. And I have not read your dissertation. I read an AI Dr. Seuss version of your dissertation.
Right.
And I figured that was good enough. That little poem written in Dr. Seuss. I don't need to read your dissertation or your bona fides. I don't care. I read the Dr. Seuss thing. Is that right? Did it summarize it fairly well?
Yes. But I would also say that what was a trickle during the time I was writing about has become a flood now. And I was writing about a time in which things were very different. And in a way, that's why I chose the era that I chose to write about, because it was this anomalous time in American history where you really had editors and gatekeepers of the conventional wisdom in a way that you hadn't really had before. But we also had a more decentralized country. And now we're in an era where I would answer the question very differently in terms of who has power and who has influence. I think those are in some ways different groups of people, because anyone who manages to have influence, they can marshal support in a corner of the world and make a living off of that. Mm-hmm. But in terms of who actually has power, I think my new answer would probably be anyone with the resources to navigate complexity. And that would include the government and rich people. Or
major trade associations or labor unions.
Well, just anybody with enough money to master how complicated, because in a system with rule of law, one of the good things about living in a society, let's look on the good side, right? When you live in a society based on rule of law, it means that nobody can come and punch you in the face and burn down your house and
take your stuff.
Well, hold on, but they can take your stuff.
Oh, darn it, what?
They can ruin your life because if they can marshal the resources to throw behind complexity, then they can ruin your life. They can ruin your livelihood. They can take away your property. They can take away your house. They can take away your job. All of that stuff can still happen to you. So we should look at it on the bright side and say, well, at least they can't murder us. But on the downside, but the flip side is our society has become so complicated and complex that you really have to either be, I don't even think that any one person could be smart enough or hardworking enough to counter, tens of thousands of bureaucrats or tens of thousands of corporate lawyers out to destroy you.
So let me see if I can punch a hole, or in more legal terms, pierce the corporate veil, or give a counter argument for just a brief second, because this isn't the theme, but I am curious about your point. You have to have money in order to understand complexity, but doesn't it seem like under this social media, gosh, this weird TV series stuff, the reality TV, the instant news cycle, it seems like if you do something stupid enough, or if somebody comes and takes your stuff, your house, your money, your fame, your reputation, whatever, it seems like there's enough sub-circumstance, sub-tribes out there that they'll do a GoFundMe, and then all of a sudden you're rich because you lost everything. And look at that.
Sure. If you're able to find your audience, right? Your small donor can certainly pool resources pretty darn quickly if you're able to, capture someone's attention or go viral or something like that. We saw that.
So it's the ability so it's either complexity or the ability to get noticed, to be weird enough or odd enough or a weird circumstance to get noticed. And then you're famous too, or have money and power.
Yeah. But I would just say, like, when we're talking about who has the power daily, the people who can grind you under their wheel on a daily basis would be like the government, rich people, and corporations. And if there are certainly ways of throwing sand in those gears in a social media environment, but not if your particular injustice isn't sexy,
right. It's got to be sexy is probably a good word. Yeah. Right. Okay. As I'm wont to do, before we go dive into a little bit more into your dissertation and that, just to give in, please don't go into ad nauseum detail, because no disrespect, but my guess is it's boring.
How dare you?
I don't know. Maybe some other professor loves it and thinks it's neat, and maybe a group of professors do. Maybe there's even a conference about it. I don't know. But for most people, the details of your dissertation, my guess, are brutal. But before we go to that, I do want to know the broad brush overviews of your dissertation, because it's why you're a PhD. It's why you're a college professor.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to figure out where conventional wisdom came from. How do we arrive at this thing called conventional wisdom that becomes the sort of average statement that the average educated person says, so that, what every newspaper editor in America thinks of John Kennedy, kind of where does that come from? And I realized that there was a very unique period in American history where opinion journalists had a really tremendous amount of influence over the shaping of conventional wisdom. And so my focus became narrower and narrower. And I realized that this period right after World War II was a pretty unique time in the history of American media, where you had these political pundits, the first real political opinion journalists that were managed to be incredibly influential over the shape of news between the Truman and then Kennedy administrations.
So, okay, we'll go into more detail on that in a second. So it is of general import as well. It's not just some detailed political scientist thing.
No. It's a story. I mean, it's a story of how a bunch of political journalists shaped how we view the presidents. Okay,
so don't go to that story yet. As I am wont to do, I like to go back to our founding. And it's not because I have some idealized, well, I guess I do have an idealized version, but I have a rational idealized version of our founding of our country. Isn't the same thing happened then? I mean, isn't Ben Franklin The Federalist Papers, they weren't printed for free by some poor pauper. Rich people and corporations have always, at least in the last couple of 100 years in America, haven't they always kind of run the roost? I mean, what that's not news.
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Rich people have always run the roost. And
rich people have certainly always had an outsized influence. But I think what I would say is that with the turn towards what we would call the modern era in the late 19th, early 20th century, it was becoming apparent that complexity being combined with the ability to marshal resources was changing the nature of how power and influence would influence a rule of law democratic society.
Well, hold on, Professor. That's part of your story. I want to go to America's story for a second, though.
This is
were actually read,
story.
weren't they?
What's that?
I sorry to interrupt you. I think you were going to go there too. But the Federalist Papers were actually read, weren't they, by common citizens? They
Sure.
were. And so they weren't printed up from free. Somebody wrote those of some means, and somebody distributed them of some means, and they were argued about by citizens and discussed. And isn't that the same as today? Somebody buys Twitter, and don't go to Elon Musk. Right? We'll do that later. But isn't it everything's deja vu all over again?
I don't know. It was.
Well, no, tell us about the history of the U.S. Early founding. And
in terms of, I guess one of the things that might be shocking is that in terms of the political elite, they were much more broadly literate and had a much more common set of educational and religious experiences. So they were able to communicate with one another more quickly and in a using a common shorthand because they were all sharing the same sort of frame of reference. It's very different from the chaotic and small d democratic fragmented media environment of today.
Well, wait. And I don't mean to jump all the way to current times, but are you telling us, that the Ivy League insiders, and it's not just Ivy League, there's some other places, including in California, but the insiders is a pretty robust internal network that most people don't have access to?
Yeah, they have a common set of experiences and feelings, and they have a common outlook. They were able to navigate, the rungs of success in order to achieve that elite status, or at least their parents were. So I'm not saying they don't have a lot in common. I'm saying they haven't read the same books. They don't share the same religious outlook. They don't have this. They were not. It's much more. There are large, complex entities spread out all over the country now. I mean, you could have like a big petrochemical company out in Idaho, and it's going to be able to impose its will on a pretty broad region. And yeah, that's not what you call Ivy League elite, but I don't know if there isn't even is. I assume there's a petrochemical company in Idaho, but or South Dakota or something. That's not probably being run by Ivy League elite, but it's still a large, complicated business entity able to marshal resources in a way that an individual couldn't possibly hope to counter.
That's different than the robber barons and the railroads and the coal mines and seems like deja vu all over again. Same thing.
Well, I mean, I guess every era is slightly different, right? The Robert, you mentioned the robber barons. It's similar yet a little bit different, right? You have, because that would be a smaller number of people, more and even more concentrated wealth and power among a smaller number of people. So, but they,
I don't know why I'm so challenging, Professor. So forgive me. I'm kind of
well,
screwing up.
it's a good point, because each era is the relationship. Yeah, American society changes. It becomes more complicated, and the role of wealth changes in each era based on how the American economy is changing, but also based on how the American political culture had changed in each era. So it's
But
just
again,
a little
Professor,
bit different in each era.
again, Professor, whether it's Ben Franklin or Carnegie or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, to me, it seems like a common thread throughout this. And by the way, I'm an optimist. I'm not positive I mean it in this way, but it seems like rich and powerful combined with media or other types of influence or funding of campaigns and however it's done. Sure, it changes, the techniques change, but it's still the same communication channels or the same education things. It's the same. It seems like it's the same to me.
Well, you had me, then you lost me.
Okay.
Like the beginning of what you said was correct, but then once you start talking about channels, influence, the structures, well, then no, that's where it becomes different with each era, and kind of defines how each era actually is a little bit different. But you are correct that in every era. But for instance, it's different if you are influential because your ideas are bring out the best in people, and you have good ideas matched with a receptive audience. That's very different than and I guess we sometimes in way back we talked about what the difference is between sophistry and statesmanship, and um, being an effective communicator in the service of the truth, and having an audience that is receptive to that message is good. But you can be an effective communicator in the service of a lie, and you can also have power and influence that is used for evil, and it makes people worse. And part of it has to do with the intent of the communicator. Some of it has to do with structural influences that would change how we receive the messages and find those messages compelling. And then some of it is the reception that it receives among an audience. What do you have people who want to do the right thing and are waiting for a leader to articulate it, or are you do you have a bunch of people who are selfish and hearing a message about how to be more selfish? It's complicated with each era.
It is complicated, but it's interesting that I'm not being studious enough with you, or maybe a good enough listener. To me, I still think, we agree, right, that Rupert Murdoch is a benevolent dictator in his media buys and influence, right? He's a benevolent, he's what you were just talking about. He's got the right ideas for the right things, and a receptive audience. Same thing with Jeff Bezos and the Washington Post. Same thing with Elon Musk and Twitter, right? They're all.
No, I wouldn't say that. But as I say that, I'm staring at the media I purchase from Rupert Murdoch every day arrives on in my driveway.
Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, right. I give Rupert Murdoch money every month.
And he's
Are you there? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Keep going.
Okay. Sorry. It froze up on my end, and
No, it's my end. I'm sure of it. So let's do a clean break, and maybe I can be a better listener. Give us a 5-minute summation of your dissertation of that era of America, and how, but weave in elements of how it may be effective today. What can we as citizens ascribe to that, both good and bad, from these media personalities? And I don't know whether it's the Peter Jennings and Dan Rather equivalent of 30 years ago, or whatever equivalent there is today, Tucker Carlson. But can you talk about your dissertation? And then the next follow-up question is another couple minutes on what's going on today and what is our role in citizens in this. And so talk about those two.
Well, my dissertation was about how elite political journalists shaped our view of the presidents. And I feel like it's still pretty useful in a couple of ways. Number one, you can appreciate that some political journalists are actually pretty good. And many of them are actually well-intentioned. And many of them do a really good job of summarizing complicated things for broad audiences. And some of them often have good insights into not just both foreign and domestic affairs as conduct, and think deeply about the American political system and the American government. So that's the good
Is
side.
this the era of your dissertation or today?
No, I think in all eras.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm saying that there are. This is me applying it broadly,
Okay.
right? What's broad? But I think it is also important to understand how people, even when they are well-intentioned, can still get big things wrong, and can also be so insular that they don't ever take a step back and check whether what they are reporting matches with reality. And then there are two sides of having gatekeepers, editors and elite political journalists. On one side, the overall quality of what they put out is going to be better and more useful. But the downside is that anything that challenges them, it's almost like it does not exist. You get the founding of National Review, for instance. The conventional wisdom can just become a behemoth that requires almost a revolution to overturn. And I guess, if you want to look at a kind of a parallel, if you want to think about it this way, would be something like the courts. The way that the American court system was going was so insidery, and that it was following a theoretical model, often to the sunset, into absurdity. And by the time the Supreme Court gets to the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, it's just almost absurd.
You're talking Roe and affirmative action and Brown v. Board of Education. You're talking about major.
For different, each of those cases are a little different, but yeah, right. And the takeover of law schools was almost entirely complete. And on one hand, you could say, well, they were doing a pretty good job, and most of the court cases they were deciding doing a pretty good job, but they were just willing to follow this theoretical model to absurdity without any kind of a check on it. And the American media environment was doing likewise. So in some sense, they become the architects of their own demise, because they become unable to see just how out of step with reality they've become. And I think the next institution of American life that's probably going to follow suit is education. It already happened in the law, it's already happened in media, it's already happened in politics, and it seems to be happening in education. The application of this principle, I always say, like, if those who, the old expression, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And
the rest of us are suffering because we did learn history, because we watch it happen.
Yeah, and I say it's not, that's not what history does for you. It's when you learn history, you're doomed to watch in slow motion horror as people make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And you just sort of say, well, what do you, I don't know. I could tell you, I told you so. But there's nothing you can sort of do to stop it. Because human beings respond to these incentives and create these institutions, and you can warn them about it and they won't listen.
Remind me again, your dissertation, there was this group of journalists from the same era,
Yep, 1945 to 1963. Yeah.
Same set of circumstances that had some hyper outsized influence on how people of that generation viewed the world.
Yep.
And the reason that happened in that era was because
of the common experiences of the Depression and World War II, and then the powerful media environment that was, you had and also because so much of it was new. The first sort of syndication meant that you want to have that Walter Lippmann column in there, or syndicated radio programs. One of the people and they sort of go from high to low, and you kind of have to have your cutoffs between what is where do you define a journalist, and and Walter Lippmann gets to the point where he's a journalist, but he's almost an academic, and certainly he's an intellectual, but he was also a columnist, right? And then at the bottom end of the spectrum, I included a guy named Drew Pearson, still including him as a journalist, but I did not include a guy named Walter Winchell because he was a little bit too wacky. And I just had to sort of draw this line when I was figuring out, and really I let the politicians be the ones who guided who I included in this group, because I just read what they were writing, and what columns were, what was Dwight Eisenhower reading, and I remember being at the Eisenhower Library, and came across in Eisenhower's handwriting files this book where he's just heavily annotating the memoirs of this guy named Arthur Kroc, and you realize, oh, he was reading Arthur Kroc. So it's who were powerful people reacting to.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So, who was Harry Truman? Who was making Harry Truman mad? What was John Kennedy? Who was John Kennedy talking to the minute he came out of a meeting with Khrushchev? And it's a pretty small group of journalists.
And this is what you do is, in order to become a PhD in history, you go to presidential libraries and read their private notes. And
yeah.
Is that how you get a PhD?
Yeah. And then, step 2 is that no one cares. Yeah.
I reached step 2. Well, darn it. Okay, cool. Give some insights into contemporary American politics. You have some influence in society. I guess it could be argued I have a little influence in society. So here's 2 guys, and then heck, Bart had a lot of influence, and Ben and Anthony joining us today. Hopefully they'll ask some questions here in a minute. What does the American citizen do with this now? I mean, we know we can't buy Twitter, and we know we can't buy the Washington Post, and we know we can't buy the Wall Street Journal. We can run for local office. We can engage in our party politics, or or join some national organization and give them $10 and get their newsletter. We can go to a forum, or we can go to a rally. I mean, there's all sorts of things citizens can do. But you're the U.S. history professor you're the one that's supposed to give us some insights so we don't repeat the damn thing again while you watching horror. So what should we be doing as citizens today, knowing how we were founded, how we evolved, what happened in your year of your dissertation, which you have subject matter expertise? What is the wisdom you can provide to us so we don't repeat the past?
Pay for good news. Pay for a news source that puts news into perspective in a responsible way. Be willing to pay for an editor. The next thing I'd say is whether or not you have kids, get involved in your local area with whatever is going on in curriculum and education, because you'll be shocked, and you might even be shocked at how you can't even communicate with educational administrators because they're so deeply ingrained in this world of edu-speak jargon you'll be shocked at how far removed education is from what you would consider essential learning. And it's not the teacher's fault. Don't blame your local teacher. So I would say take an interest in how you receive media, take an interest in educational institutions, and then in terms of your local politicians, take an interest in electing good people to office, and whoever seems to have the better public character is probably deserving of your vote. And then serve on one city committee. And the other thing is, like, I guess I'd say, like, don't get away from your computer and go to church and join a club. Join a club. Join the Masonic Lodge or the Kiwanis
So you're being a contrarian. No one's doing that these days.
Right. Well, that's the point. Those are the things that hold civil society together, and that's what has to happen in order for human beings not to deal with one another as abstractions. It's easy to hate an abstraction. It's hard to hate somebody who's in your softball league.
But there's a ton of people now. Gosh, there's just so much different paths we could go down. You do know that kids, and I don't mean kids, I mean young adults, Xers and young Xers and millennials and whatever's after millennials. That's how old I am. I don't even know what they're called. I know they're in the workforce now. I just don't know what they're called. You do know that they communicate with all sorts of people, but it's more worldwide. It's more like, because they're all in a rock climbing club or some weird social dance thing, or they follow some music group, or all these gamers. I mean, the gamers are supposedly going to surpass the NFL. The amount of people that will watch somebody gaming online, and then they talk to each other and coordinate and make bets and have a community around it. I mean, so
there's a difference
all over again, or no?
There's no substitute for reality, though. I would just say that there's a big difference between listening to music in your home versus hearing a symphony in person. There's a difference.
Don't date yourself. You also like rock and roll and indie. You like all sorts of. What do you mean? But
my point is that don't confuse digitally simulated communication with real relationships, because real relationships involve sacrifice and digital relationships don't involve sacrifice. a real relationship. I mean, my real friends are flawed human beings, and you have to love one another in all of their complexity. And you do not have to do that in a digital environment. If you don't like what somebody's saying, you can say horrible things to them, or you can cut them off, or you can close your computer, and that person ceases to exist. Now, that's not how relationships work in the real world. The politician who makes a bad decision and then has to face somebody, right? That's different. But by the same token, like when you're going through some sort of crisis, I don't care how many heart emojis get shared with you on social media. It's not the same as having a lifelong friend just put their hand on your shoulder. And there is no substitute for that. And there is no digital substitute for that. And you should stop looking for a digital substitute for that. There is nothing but, the individual human being who hugs you. I mean, that contact that you have with others, and it means more to you than, the last hug I got from my kids was more important to me than every thumbs up I've ever received on any social media platform for my entire life.
So let me bridge that. A really interesting point on that. So I appreciate you bringing it up in the way you did. Again, and under citizenship, are you telling me that the individual, non-powerful, non-rich, non-president of anything, just a neighbor, a parent, or just a person that goes to a town hall meeting who has some insightful thing to say to the school board or the city council or the state legislature, if it's an important message that they know and they mean and they're authentic and they say it, that may make a huge impact, not just because of the individual that's in front of them, the mayor or whoever, but it could also go viral and other people could resonate with it. That changes the way we view an issue. Do individual citizens still have power in America or no?
Yes. And I would say the most important and powerful message that Americans need to understand is how important they are to their friends and their families and their neighbors. That one of the most powerful political acts is that when my neighbor across the street every year hosts a dinner for everyone on the block, You're
saying that's a political act.
I'm saying that that politics can do nothing but reflect the culture. As I'm sorry, there's an old Theodore Roosevelt line. If Jake was here, he could find the speech, but he says, "You must have a pretty robust faith in names and theories if you find the condition his point is that that all politics can do is reflect the culture, and if you have a bad culture, you're in a representative government, you're going to have a bad government."
That's really insightful.
And so when my neighbor asks for help, help your neighbor, right? Blow off your neighbor's sidewalk, would deliver oranges to him. I'm trying to think of when my neighbor found my kid's coat on the lawn, she washed it and brought it back. Right?
Washed it. Wow.
Yeah. And these are all things that make it possible for, locks don't keep your house secure. It's the culture that keeps your house secure.
Right. Fascinating.
As Lincoln once said, right? Not him who is houseless pull down the house of another, but let us, endeavor to build his own so that both will be safe from violence when built. You want to know what keeps both of us safe? Like both of us taking care of our houses keeps both of our houses safe. and there's just no replacement for that, digital or otherwise. The common decency of individual people. And that's why I've also always always sided with Theodore Roosevelt over Woodrow Wilson in these big arguments they had over whether or not it's the system that's evil or or whether it's individuals. And I always say, no, it's individuals. Like I want that CEO put in jail. I want a perp walk, and I don't care what the injustice is. There's a human being who did that, and I want that human being punished.
You don't want the organization or business to pay a fine. You want the person.
No, I want to find the person who broke the law and committed an immoral act, and I want the full resources of the government brought to bear against that powerful person, because they are guilty. And I don't care how clever they are or how many lawyers they have, right? But it's an important distinction, because Woodrow Wilson kind of threw up his hands and said, no, it's the system. It's the system that's bad. It's the system that's bad. And I got some bad news for you. You can't stop the world. You can't stop the world from turning. Attacking some nebulous concept called the system. Again, I'm quoting Theodore Roosevelt. He said, this gives you the same pleasure you would have at going to the circus and looking at a spotted cow or something like that, or you watching a spotted horse perform a trick or something. But if you really want to make progress in society, it comes down to, what do individual human beings do for both good and ill? It's the culture more than anything else.
Okay.
A necessary condition.
And that's a really helpful way to end my facilitated discussion. Sorry to go to long as usual. So I'm not sure whether to go to Bart or Tony next. Tony, you actually, if you were listening well, you probably have some umbrage at some of the things the professor said today. And I know you're polite, and you may not want to take this bait. But did you love this presentation, or is there some things that you go, I don't know, I have some concerns about this? Have we swayed you over to our side of thinking, Tony, or do you have, or you still have your own code of ethics?
Yeah, well, I find myself, especially with the last part of what the professor and you were talking about, not disagreeing. I think I'm 100% in favor of holding people accountable and that kind of thing. So it's interesting. I don't have a lot of umbrage, I'm the kind of person that listens and filters, and then maybe in 15 minutes I'll have something that.
Yeah, but Tony, I think we've won on you. You're a good case story. I mean, you're a traditional liberal. I mean, aren't you? Don't you describe yourself as almost maybe a progressive?
I would have described myself easily as a progressive a few years ago. So
yeah, but you seem to love everything the professor says, and they're not necessarily liberal and progressive.
Yeah, what I appreciate about it is that I get to hear fully the other side instead of yelling at the gaps, or at the edges of what are, kind of. It's just like, hey, if I listen more, I actually begin to hear things that make a lot of rational sense to me and that I agree with,
Okay. Well, I guess, Professor, we've won over. We just need 332 million more.
Well, here's the problem, I think, and it has to do with what gets perpetuated in the media environment is that there are very few conservative voices, and what you hear instead are populist anti-liberals. They don't have any actual beliefs. They're just motivated by hatred. They don't have any ideas of their own. They just know that they hate progressives. And, that's not me. I've always thought that I've never understood this idea of politics that the goal is to make people not want to vote for you. I've always thought that the point was to take people who didn't want to vote for you and get them to want to vote for you. And I've never understood this idea that somehow hating people was a sufficient answer, but it certainly can do a lot in today's modern media environment. But I'm not a populist anti-liberal. I'm just a traditional, old-fashioned, classical liberal American conservative.
Yeah. Let's hope there's a lot more out you there.
I always say there's about 12 of us.
Okay, great.
They all, I mean, it's funny. I got this email asking, like, because I teach at, I guess it's okay to say this. I also teach at Ashland University in Ohio, and they have this thing there called the Ashbrook Center and the Teaching American History Center. And they sent out an email saying, we need some more professors. Who else would kind of fit in our mold? And as I was thinking about it, I was like, I've already recommended everybody I know. Like I'm sure there are more out there, but I'm at the end of my Rolodex. Like I think there are only 12 of us, and they all teach at Ashland.
And by the way, who is your I forget, I don't have a PhD, I have a JD. Well, who is is it advisor? Who is for your dissertation?
Alonzo Hamby, who wrote.
Give a line on that, because I think it's worthy of having.
He's probably one of the foremost chroniclers of 20th century liberalism. He wrote Liberalism and Its Challengers, Beyond the New Deal, and his sort of masterwork, I think, was his biography of Harry Truman, which is, probably 100 years from now, people are still going to be reading that book. I mean, that was his life's work, and it was an extraordinary piece of scholarship. Also wrote about Franklin Roosevelt and I always say, like, one of the things that might shock people is I didn't study conservatism. I studied liberalism. My advisor was somebody who studied liberalism. He's a Harry Truman liberal, and the conservatism, that was on my own. I didn't study conservatism in school. I studied liberalism in school. But he was a great guy. He just had his birthday. He's getting up there, and but he's certainly one of the great historians of the 20th century and 21st century.
I'm glad that came out during the interview, so thank you for that. So Bart, not to talk about my little tiny project, but I've asked for your assistance in identifying some people that can help, and not conservatives, because I don't know if you're a conservative, but just thoughtful people that can help society out. After this whole conversation today, don't give a response to me. We can do that offline, but give some reaction or ideas on the role of citizenship in Colorado/America today. And you can ask your own question too, but give me some gut reaction to what the professor said today with that context.
Sure. One of the things that actually you and I and some of our, associated friends have talked about in the past is I think there's this, I don't know what you want to call it, tendency, I guess, in our society to want to create explanations for things that are kind of, they have one cause to them. And a lot of times what I've been reminded of, actually by you, John, is that there is no monolithic sort of power behind the throne going on. There are a lot of people like you and me who want to influence what happens in our society and our government. And we are pretty good sometimes we're not so good at knowing how to insert ourselves into the environment in a way to try to get the result that we think is going to be best in any given situation. And I think that's what people do. I think, Professor Tootle's thesis that he wrote is really, really good, because I think you were chronicling the historical figures involved in, the historical figures who were influential journalists during the period of time you were looking at. And they were very, very influential. I mean, from what I've read of Walter Winchell, for example, I mean, he was kind of nutty. I mean, he'd be right up there with, I don't know, Elon Musk and who's the other guy?
Hey, wait, Bart, we're looking for potential sponsorship for our conversation here. Don't be offending Elon Musk and others.
No, I'm not trying to offend him. I'm just kind of, I mean, it's not just Elon Musk. The other guy is the one who was convicted of contempt of Congress recently. Who am I thinking of? He still does his show on Pluto TV and everything.
The InfoWars guy, the guy that gave frog.
Yeah.
Oh, don't mention his name don't mention his name. I know.
Okay, we're not mentioning his name.
I can't remember his name, but
I do. Don't mention it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I don't remember his name, but I know. I think I know who you're talking about now.
Yeah. I mean, no names of important figures out there now. But the reality is, I think at any given time, I think a lot of what the professor was saying, and I think John, you were saying too, a lot of what ends up happening in our society depends on the people who are willing to personally get involved in trying to influence it. And I think that's a key thing, and John, you and I mean, we have direct experience with this. I mean, you're one of the more conservative people I know politically, but you came out for actually creating, and you actually helped create an entire level of government that didn't exist, before, you got involved in doing it. And that was probably something that went against every political instinct that you possessed at that time. But you kind of looked at the options and you just said, well, this is something we ought to do. I'm more liberal, I guess, or progressive than you. So I had kind of reached that conclusion before you did. But as soon as you reached it, I realized, gosh, we might actually be able to accomplish this. Because, John was very influential, and still is. And he was going to be reaching out to people of like mind who were probably going to be convinced fairly quickly that that was a great idea. And I realize I'm talking kind of in code here, but and what we're talking about is we created a very large city that didn't exist. The city was there, but it didn't have a government. It's Centennial, Colorado. I think I can mention that. Sure. But, I think the conversation you and John and the professor were having here is really correct. It's a lot of things are based on your personal relationships. And and initially in your conversation, you were mentioning that most normal people like us don't have access to the journalists who are influencing us or attempting to at any given time. And that's probably true. I mean, I can't pick up the phone and call David French, or something, or Jonah Goldberg.
You should try that, Bart. Why don't you do that as an experiment?
See if he answers,
Well, just as an example, he does that podcast with Sarah Isgur, and I messaged Sarah Isgur, and she wrote me back.
Oh yeah, I think they will.
She'll write you back. She's on ABC News all the time. So
sure. I mean, yeah, we do. I think we have more access and we have more ability to be part of some of this than we actually want to admit. And I think other people who are normal people in the society, they could also have that access. It's not exclusive to us. We're more, because we're having these conversations and stuff, we're more able to I don't know, have the guts to do it.
Yeah. But most people don't get involved in government until they get angry. And so when they approach their government, they're already upset. And thus, people tend to be dismissive of angry people and people who are upset or aggrieved. And
So-
yeah, go ahead.
So, by the way, both Professor from a theoretical way and Bart from a practical way, I want to interject a comment question. I have this premise that if you want to be effective in government as a citizen, I'm not talking about some major organization, just a person out there, see if you can get one other person to also show up at the meeting, or one other person to write the email or the Facebook post or make the phone call.
Mhm.
Because it's a double check to know whether you're just really angry or have a bad day. If you can't get one other person to show up with you at the meeting, it's probably not a good idea to show up the meeting and say whatever you wanted to say. If you could get 2 people, 3 of you, that's a damn movement. And I mean, and the city council person will go, oh my God, I heard from 3 people. Everybody's talking about it. And by the way, I speak from practical experience. This isn't theoretical. If 3 people don't seem like they're necessarily connected, say something, man, there must be a lot of other people out there thinking it. Professor theoretical and Bart practical, concur or disagree?
Well, it's sort of complicated in my case because right now I just had a mediation with my city and with 3 of my neighbors. So literally, and we were told to go pound sand. And,
with 3 of you. All right. Well, you need 4.
so that they don't have to enforce their own laws because it would expose them to too much financial liability. So
Okay.
well,
thanks for blowing my whole thesis.
sorry, I just happened to specifically ask something that happened to me last week where
But you know what, just to add something real quick, even though you didn't get what you wanted in that mediation, you have made the city very aware of what you guys are talking about. And they may not be willing to do anything about it right this moment. But at some point in time in the future, when the issue comes up again, my guess is, they're going to be primed to think about it really hard.
sure.
I concur with that. Do you agree with that, Professor?
Yeah, and in that regard, they would never do what they did in this circumstance. They would never do that again. They have learned their lesson, but they will not go back and fix what they did. So, but but I think you're right. What happened to us will probably never happen to anyone else again.
Interesting insights. I know we're over time already. I want Ben at least to make a comment. You don't have to, but this is your opportunity if you have one.
No, the only comment is we're now number 53 on these, and I consider myself 53 times smarter.
Wow.
So thank you for putting these on.
You're so kind, especially since you apparently are working at Mission Control. Your background is
Well, I don't want to show you my real background. It's there's computers everywhere. I'd rather show you something that's a little more entertaining.
Yeah, in case we ever go viral, we don't want something weird to be on there. Okay, cool. Tony, Bart, Ben, last call to ask.
Can I just say one last thing? I just want to say thank you to the 4 of you for doing this and listening and the thoughtful questions and all this for so long. It's really pretty extraordinary, your commitment to whatever this little project is. And I don't want to go another week without saying thank you again, because even though I tend to talk too much, I really do get a lot out of your questions, and you guys have all really made me think on more than one occasion. So I just want to say thank you for that.
That's so darn nice of you, Professor.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm off to other meetings. I assume you all are today. Thank you. Hope Professor next week or no?
I think so.
Okay, I think so too. So I'll try to promote the show more than like 45 minutes before the show. Okay, great. Thank you all for being here.